Right, thank you for joining me today. I'm Bridget Romanes from Mobile Relocation, and my guest is Amanda Sadlier. What we're going to talk about today is what it's like to be a spouse of a New Zealander who's not actually a New Zealander and hasn't lived in New Zealand, but moves back to New Zealand. And Amanda has just been in that situation. She arrived in Auckland with her husband, who's a New Zealander, and her three children from the US. Amanda is obviously from the US, and the children were all born overseas, and they have been in New Zealand before, but not to live. So really, I thought I'd start off by asking you, Amanda, what sort of spurred you to make the move to New Zealand? What was going through your mind about coming here?
Well, it was a series of things that happened for both my husband and myself at the same time, deciding that the lifestyle that we had in the US was not fully in keeping with our family values and wanting to simplify things. And really being inspired by the fact that when we would come to New Zealand to visit our family here, I felt like that was when our family could be at our best. We could just slow down and spend time together and focus on that instead of this sort of hurried rat race.
Yeah. So, and tell me a little bit about your experience of New Zealand before you came here. You mentioned that you'd been on holiday here. What did you know about the place?
Yeah, well, the my experience with New Zealand was really about visiting family. So we would come back every year or two, and the sites that we would visit, basically all in the North Island, would be visiting family. So coming and spending some time with friends and family in Auckland, maybe stopping in Hamilton, maybe going down to Wanganui, Palmerston North, and then Wellington, where my husband grew up. So our time had been really sort of a hybrid of holiday, and then we would get this little routine, right, where we'd stay at an Airbnb and like find the neighborhood parks and that sort of thing. So I felt like from going to parks and being out and about with the family and the community that I had some glimmer, a glimpse of what life was like from seeing how parents interacted with their kids and talking to our friends about their kids in school and about their lives and jobs and commutes and that sort of thing.
And I suppose the big question that springs to my mind, and probably anyone else in a similar situation to you, when they're listening to the answer to that question, is did the reality match your holiday experience?
Yeah, so I think that that's been one of the most eye-opening things is that the rat race exists here as well.
Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
but sort of going back to the why we did it is it's just our touch point for our family. You know, we made this move because we wanted a simplified life. So when we look at our calendar and it's starting to feel really full, or the kids are tired and cranky because it's just one thing after another, it really gives us a touch point to go back and say, like, wait a minute, that's not why we're here. We're here because we want to have open time in our lives to be able to connect with our neighbors, to make new friends, to go to the park, to take a walk just because. So it we've been intentional about trying to still achieve what we were looking for. I will say that one of the hardest things is um, that from being here on holiday and the kids always being like, oh, we're on holiday, we get treats, we get to go to the dairy, we get to da 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 da. Now it's like after school and can't we go to the dairy? And it's like, no, it's an average Tuesday. We're not on holiday. um, so breaking some of those sorts of old habits and getting into a daily life here it's been a challenge, but it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, so there's the difference between being in a place on holiday and then actually living there. Inevitable. It's not going to be quite the same as you go. Yeah. And if you cast your mind back, what were the things that were most sort of concerning or top of mind, or sort of, I don't know what that's going to be like, sort of feeling about coming to New Zealand, as the expat, not the local?
Yeah, I think I was actually fairly naive in looking at it because I'd been with my husband for over a decade before we moved, and so, I have lots of Kiwi friends and family, and it's just like, oh yeah, I just kind of, blend in as one and the same. And so I didn't really think about that going into the experience. And the reality has been that, especially because right now with there not being tourists, um, by and large in New Zealand, I do stick out. Um, and so I do find myself having to sort of justify my presence more than I expected. I think in terms of what was worrying me when we were 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks out from our move, is just realizing how much it had taken to wind down our lives in the US, and then the daunting task of winding up all of those things here, and not knowing what the systems or the process was going to be like. And because my husband had been away for 20 years, and we were moving back to Auckland where he hadn't lived before, it was sort of new to him as well. And so that's how we connected with mobile and said help, because it just felt so daunting as a logistics measure. Never mind the emotions of trying to get everyone, having left physically and emotionally left one place and getting settled in both ways here as well.
Mm. Can I just go back to the comment you made about feeling you needed to explain yourself or justify your existence in New Zealand? How did that show up? Because I think that's probably something that people might be a little bit curious about. Did you feel that people were, judging or curious? Or how did those, give me an example of the kind of situation that would happen in?
It comes out sort of both ways. I think there is every once in a while some judgment. I think it's more curiosity. So it might be something like I'm at a store, and um, so they'll ask if I have like the loyalty card or whatever, and then they'll almost be hesitant because it's like, are you really a local? Um, but then they realize, well, but I'm here, and they might even look in my wallet and be like, oh, there's her BNZ card, or her New Zealand driver's license. So there's sort of that kind of hesitancy. Um, I recently had some interactions with the healthcare system, and I had people asking like, so are you a tourist? Like, how are you here? Or just, I had a nurse out of curiosity say like, so are you stuck here? Were you visiting and got stuck here? No, no, I live here and made that decision intentionally.
Yeah, and possibly you're right in highlighting the lack of international tourists as meaning that people who speak with a different accent stand out a bit more in New Zealand than they have in recent
Yeah,
years.
and I think that that's something that's different from my experience in these 7 or so months compared to on visits. Because when we would visit, usually it was over the summer, and so there would be a lot of international tourists, and it wasn't. I didn't really stick out because there were other, Americans, Canadians, whoever with North American accents, in the shopping queue with me.
Hmm. So just looking at it more broadly, overall, what was your experience, or anything you'd like to highlight about sort of settling into a local community that you're living in, and schools and just life here? Anything you noticed or would like to talk about?
I think one of the things that's unique about this period in time is that there is a lot of movement. There are a lot of families moving into the area from overseas, and so we aren't the only family getting settled and getting our feet under us, which has been nice. It's been good that the kids aren't the only ones at school having that experience. Um, I'm reminded from having, we moved from Seattle, but I didn't grow up in Seattle. I moved there and had to establish my life there. And I'm remembering now moving here that, when you're getting set up in a community, everyone sort of has their network. And so it does take effort, to get to meet people. But I think that I've found the community here has been very willing, if you put the effort to get to know folks.
Mhm. Okay. I had one question I wanted to ask you. Whether it's a male or a female returning Kiwi with a partner, doesn't matter too much. But, has it had any impact on your relationship with you being the one who is coming to the Kiwi's home as opposed to the Kiwi having lived, in your case, in your home country?
Yeah. Yeah, this is something that surprised me a bit, coming, and there are actually a couple of pieces to this. One is I have so much more empathy for the experience that my husband went through 15 years living in the US, and in particular, having lots of people be obnoxious about his accent. Like, could you please just say that again? We just love hearing your accent. Um, I don't get that here, but certainly being the memorable part of the partnership is a new experience for me, and not being able to be anonymous is a different experience than just blending in. And so that has actually made this a real shared experience now that have both had the experience of living in the other person's country. I think that's been really good for our relationship. The other thing that I've noticed is when I notice differences between the cultures and the way things are done, and I've learned to sort of temper what I share, because while I'm noticing differences, I don't mean it critically, but
Mhm.
it's easy for it to come across critically. And it's easy for him to be like, but wait a second, what's wrong with, whatever the thing is. And it's like, well, nothing, it's just a difference.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a different experience than we do with a lot of expat families where both or the whole family are expats. No one in the family really knows that much about New Zealand and they come and live here, as opposed to having one person who's sort of slightly experienced and one newcomer. I think it's quite a different dynamic
mhm.
that needs to be thought about. Um, Now, I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of final questions. Firstly, what's one key insight or piece of advice that you want to give to any other family in your situation with a Kiwi returning with a spouse who is not a Kiwi?
I think it's really important to find your own identity and your own people. It's so easy when you have someone who has the connections locally to have your network go out from there, and that's helpful. It's really helpful. It's really warm and inviting. But I think it's also important to make the effort to find people who are interested in your hobbies and have connections independent of the partnership, or independent of that original network. So that would be, I think, the piece of advice I would give.
Mm. And what has that been for you in practice? What sort of interests have you worked around to connect with people?
Well, I'm pretty intentional when I'm meeting other parents at the school,
Mhm.
and paying attention to who I really feel like I click with.
Mhm.
And out in the community, I might, run into someone at a cafe, and, just being open to having those conversations. I think that's actually one of the most exciting things about living somewhere new is every time I leave the house, it's an opportunity to find a new favorite spot. Every time I go to the supermarket, it's an opportunity to find a new favorite product or food. Every time you run into someone on the street, you never know. It could be the day you're going to find your new best friend.
Mm.
So just being open to that potential, I think, is what it's looked like for me.
Yeah, I like that idea of searching for novelty because so much is a novelty, you may as well make advantage of it.
Yeah.
And my final question, is there anything else, that you'd like to share about your experience that you think might be helpful for other people?
I think it's important to have things that you tackle on your own to feel that empowerment, but also to feel open, and vulnerable to asking for help and getting the professional help that you need when you need it, and asking questions. And whether that be, like for us, asking questions of mobile, or asking questions of our family and friends. Um, we recently had a situation where a new friend's parent passed away. And so I said to a mutual friend, would you mind telling me what the New Zealand cultural expectations and processes around funerals and around a death in the family, because I don't know what that looks like. And I could sort of go through it blindly, or I could just ask.
Absolutely, that's a good point to end on. Being open to learning as much as you can and leaning on people when you need them, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Amanda, for your time and for sharing your experience as a US partner of a New Zealander returning to New Zealand. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
my pleasure. Thank you.